The story that I will tell you happened to me personally in mid-October 1989. I, still quite a young man, went on another adventurous kayak trip along the lakes of Karelia with my friend Dimka, who was 7 years older than me. Such trips usually took us about a week. That autumn we went kayaking down the Suna River. We spent the first few nights in a tent, but on the 5th night, we accidentally stumbled upon a forest hut of local Karelians, standing on one of the small wooded islands. In the evening the weather deteriorated. Clouds had come from somewhere, a fine, nasty rain was drizzling. And finding such a place to sleep was a great success. Having moored, we unloaded, pulled out, and turned over the kayak. It didn't take long to find the road, only one path led to the hut. From the other side it was impossible to get to the hut, so everything there was overgrown with small bushes. At that time they did not steal the way they do now. There were enough utensils in the hut, mattresses, dishes, candles. There was even a kerosene stove. I'm not even talking about a weekly supply of food, a whole shelf of liter glass jars in which cereals, pasta, and other food that could be stored for a long time were hidden from mice. There was even a tiny cellar in the hut, in which there was a can of stew, a couple of cans of barley with pork, and even a check of vodka. Even in the cellar, for some reason, there was a small icon of St. Nicholas Ugodnik. Now I know who was depicted on the icon, but then orthodoxy was for me a white spot on the map of my world. The hut itself was a log house made of dead wood. The cracks between the logs were filled with dry moss, bunk beds were arranged along the hut's walls, and there was a table in the center between them, so it was convenient to sit at the table and sleep. The table with its narrow side rested against the end wall of the hut, and a window was cut through the wall directly above it. Another window was above a small table, next to a metal stove potbelly stove. A small table, like a kitchen table, was knocked together right there. Under it a pine block was pushed, which served as a stool. In general, it was a very cozy and warm place. Even the front door was insulated from the inside with fiberglass with a thick layer of batting underneath. There was no castle, of course. The door was simply propped up with a pole so that the wind would not accidentally open it. From the inside, the door was locked with an ordinary cab hook. The day behind the oars turned out to be tiring, but the fishing made me happy. Behind the hut, as if to order, there was even a small metal oil lamp. The alder grew nearby, so for dinner, there were deafeningly smelling smoked groupers on the table. We did not get the check from the cellar. We had dark rum in a metal flask in reserve for such a case. But they got the icon and put it on the table. We were just about to have dinner when there was a knock on the door. Dimka and I decided that one of the owners of the hut had swooped in and was already depressed, imagining another night in the tent. I did not want to leave the heated hut in the cold dampness at all. However, it worked out. One of the local Karelians, a short, thick-set man, asked to stay with us. How he was dressed, now it is difficult to remember. In my opinion, he was wearing a padded jacket, some kind of unusual hat, and striped trousers tucked into boots. It was somehow not customary to introduce oneself. Fate brought under one roof for one night, divorced and dispersed, the travelers forgot each other. We invited the man to the table. He did not refuse. He sat down and took out a piece of bread wrapped in newspaper from his pocket. He nodded at the image. Did you get it from under the floor? The man spoke with a pronounced Karelian accent, emphasizing every vowel in the word, which made the speech sound somehow unusually solemn. Yes, they got it. But what is it? Dimka and I were surprised at the question. In vain, he answered shortly and put the icon face down. After the fish and rum were finished, the peasant went to the kitchen table, sat down on a block of wood, and lighting his pipe, retired to himself. By that time it was dark. The drizzle was replaced by a small snowfall, so far short-lived, but predicting the coming winter. Only one candle was left burning on the table, and the evening in the hut in the middle of the dense forest set us up in a mystical mood by itself. We discussed books for a long time, which we were seriously passionate about. Then the conversation turned to all sorts of topics related to the world of spirits. I told how my friends and I, after reading the spiritualistic novels of Conan Doyle, tried to engage in table turning. Then I suggested trying to drive a saucer. Dimka, who had previously been actively chatting, then suddenly fell silent. I tried to continue the topic of spiritualism, but Dimka, somehow abruptly cutting me off, asked me to be silent. We smoked silently for 5 minutes. And then he began to speak. About 10 years ago, I served in a communications company. We were already preparing for demobilization when suddenly we were thrown into exercises. Our company was located not far from Tambov, on an abandoned collective farm. The company was small, mostly communications specialists. There were 4 in our group. I, Talik the driver, Vitka the radio operator, and Slavik. Slavik was our central figure, the cook. All are already old-timers, as they used to say, grandfathers. Accordingly, we could afford more other soldiers. We had little work and enough time, and in the evenings the guys and I went to play preference. We played in the barn, which was a stone's throw from our tents. Yes, we were sitting, of course, not in a cow stall. A corridor was made between the stalls of the barn, the floor of which was broken in places, rotten in places, but it was possible to pass with a flashlight. This corridor led us to the door leading to the restroom. This is where we sat. And so, in the evening we gathered in the barn, lit a candle, and sat down. Our stools were the same logs as here in the hut, only much heavier. Probably oak, we barely moved them. Slavka was late. The bullet is supposed to be painted for 3. Talik did not play preference, but he did not want to play with the hussar. Here Talik suggested the idea. Let's, he says, summon spirits. I know how. Yes, and I will teach you, nothing complicated, but fun. Then you will scare the girls in civilian life. Everyone got excited about the idea. Talik said that he needed a sheet of paper, a saucer, a candle, and a pencil. I had a pencil. Talik found a saucer with a crack in the sideboard, and behind a sheet of paper came a layer of wallpaper, torn off by Vitka from the wall. Talik spread the sheet on the table, marked it into sectors, and wrote letters and numbers. They put a saucer with a crack on the sheet, and a burning candle in the left corner of the sheet, and it began. We placed 2 fingers of each hand on a saucer. First, Talik summoned the spirit of Napoleon, then someone else, I don't remember now. I remember that the saucer was rushing across the sheet. The crack pointed to the letters at such a speed that we barely had time to put them into words. We tried to catch which of us was moving the saucer, asking tricky questions from our own past that no one was supposed to know about. The spirits answered all our questions. It seemed that they knew everything about us. But Talik, and this was not enough. He demanded that the spirits prove their reality. Then the nightmare began. The saucer abruptly froze, and the candle immediately went out. We jumped to our feet. From the hallway leading to the break room, heavy rhythmic thuds rang out. It didn't immediately dawn on me that these were steps, so hard and somehow slowly someone was walking along the corridor. The closest comparison will probably be the tread of the statue of the commander. In complete darkness, no light was visible through the cracks in the boards in the door, and I have already said that it is impossible to walk on such a rotten floor in complete darkness without a flashlight. Heavy footsteps that shook the floor were approaching. Talik lit a candle. The sound of footsteps stopped. There was a long pause as everyone stared at the door. Probably 10 seconds passed, which lasted at least 5 minutes according to the inner feeling. The door slowly opened, and our Slavic entered, clutching a thermos to his chest. The picture would be funny if it were not for the absolutely white face of Slavka, who looks in front of him in fear. I looked around and saw that Slavic was looking at Vitka. Vitek, 60 meters tall, weighing a little over 50 kilograms, held an oak block of wood over his head, weighing no less than Vitek himself. The general stupor was interrupted by a dull blow of a block of wood that had fallen to the floor behind Vitka's back. The candle went out again. When we lit it, we saw that the door was closed and Slavic was not in the room. A rustle on the table caught our attention. We watched in horror as the saucer, crawling on its own on a piece of paper, wrote enough, after which it split in half along the crack. We, without saying a word, rushed into the air, away from here. We did not find Slavka that evening. He was found in the morning, outside the village. He was nailed with a pitchfork through his chest to the back wall of the barn. The blow was so strong that the chest was pressed inward. Slavka's blue face was terribly distorted as if it had been beaten with a sledgehammer. The gouged eye dangled on a nerve thread. I still dream of this picture. Talik, as soon as he saw what had become of Slavka, went to the guardroom, took the machine gun from the sentry, and shot himself. Then there was an investigation. We were sent to various authorities, but soon they got rid of it, blaming everything on Talik. So from that day on, I had enough spiritism for the rest of my life. The night in the dense forest, the flickering light of a lone candle standing in the middle of the table, and the dim flame of the pipe illuminating the thick eyebrows of the night guest with red, gave Dimka's story an understanding of how fragile and transparent the barrier that separates the world of the unknown from our world. It was the owner who was naughty then. The man broke the silence. You called him and did not treat him. So he got angry, and he took his own. And who is he, this master? I asked. It happens in different ways. Sometimes, Altea is naughty. You think there will be a spirit. But your master was not a Altea. He only took one. Altea would have taken everyone. Yours was one of the sorcerers. I didn't have time to give up my strength to death, so I was furious and restless. How do you know that? Dimka started up. I know. And it's time for you to sleep. The man puffed on his pipe, and we were knocked out like an anesthetic. In the morning, when we woke up, we saw that the peasant was gone. Deciding that he had left quietly, they quickly boiled a kettle on the stove, at the same time burning the remnants of yesterday's dinner in it. While waiting for boiling water, we got ready for the road. But when we opened the door, we were a little surprised. Or rather, they were stunned. The snow that had fallen that night lay in a thin layer all over the clearing surrounding the hut. And on this snow, there were no traces, neither to the hut nor from the hut. Thinking that the man decided to play a trick on us, we returned to the hut. There was definitely nowhere to hide, but we checked everything possible. They looked under the bunk and stuck their nose into the underground. The icon of St. Nicholas the Pleasant lay again in the cellar. The man was nowhere to be found. The only evidence of his visit was a bundle left on the table. Having unrolled it, we were stunned a second time. In a piece of the newspaper Karelian Commune, dated as early as July 20th, 1928, a hefty rye bread cracker was wrapped, completely inedible because of its fossil. The bundle also flew into the oven, where it immediately flared up as if the bread had been soaked in alcohol. We took our luggage and went to the shore, where an overturned kayak lay. There we were stunned for the third time. Thin as paper, the morning coastal ice was untouched along the entire coast. That is, no one sailed to the island or sailed away. The weather in the morning was nothing like yesterday. There was complete calm. The kayak cut through the perfect mirror of the lake, which reflected the blue sky. The air was crystal clear, icy in the morning. The kayak seemed to be hovering between water and sky, and it was not clear where one ends and the other begins. The sun has already risen above the horizon, its rays breaking through the golden autumn crowns of trees growing along the shores of the lake. The bark of the pines in these rays also seemed golden. The whole landscape breathed such peace that all our nightly experiences began to slowly fade in memory. But still, we had to be surprised again. Having sailed from behind the island, about 100 meters away, we saw a swaying ball of gray fog in a small bay. Deciding at least here to figure out what's what, we swam to this ball. But not having swum even a dozen meters, they saw how a boat carriage floated out of this ball, in which two women were sitting. Both of them had desperately smoking pipes in their mouths. Well, they smoked something for themselves, Dimka snorted. We laughed softly, restraining ourselves so as not to accidentally knock over the loaded kayak. But we still made it to the boat. It was interesting what kind of man spent the night with us. After listening to our description of the peasant, one aunt said, "This is Fedka Lesinin, our father. He was good, he did not refuse a single wedding. Only he died a long time ago, 50 years already. My mother told me about him and how he suffered. He could not give his strength to anyone. All of ours were already Komsomol members. They didn't believe in fairy tales, and they didn't want to know the sorcerer. Everyone forgot how much good he did for people." "Yes, exactly, Fedka. He was so alive. He raised my father to his feet when his back was broken by a pine tree. Yes, and now it happens. It seems to people," said the second. "Well, since you are alive, it means that our papa looked at you. Whoever leaves him alive will not get sick that year," added the first. "He didn't leave anything for you?" asked the second. "Left it, rotten cracker in an old newspaper." "And what did they take?" "Of course not. They slept in the oven." "Well, fools. He left his strength to you through bread. Now you can't go back to the hut. It will be bad." Fedko is now angry. "You won't leave alive." Puzzled, we said goodbye to the Carols. After 3 or 4 hours, we swam to the clearings, where a passing timber truck stopped, which brought us to the railway station. We have never been to those parts again. I don't know if Fedka helped or our campaigns hardened me, but since that trip, for 2 years I have never sneezed. About the burnt power, I confess, I remember more than once. I regretted that I burned it.